That way I'm in control of it. Okay. Hopefully we'll have some more people joining us. They may be over at the other building, wondering where everybody is. So I apologize for that. Thank you for being here. Since we're ready to go ahead and get started. Dr. Herbert, MAE, right? Yay. We're glad to have you here today and hear what you have to say. And if you need anything, just let me know.
All right, great.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. Hi, everyone. Since it's a relatively small group, if you have any questions while I'm talking, I'm happy to just make this informal chat. So my name is Sylvia. I'm in I think my second year, I think about second year as a professor. I did my PhD at Berkeley and then came here during COVID. I now have 4 or 5 PhD students from different backgrounds. And I work on safety for autonomous systems. So normally we're thinking about this like robots type of thing, but we're looking at applications beyond this. And so Will is my first bio-E student, and he's starting to explore how we could apply some of the math that we use on the robotic side towards the more biological system side of things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of what we generally do in the lab, and then I'm going to talk at a very high level about the project that Will and I are starting to explore. And if you have questions about that, you can ask both of us since Will's in the room. Hopefully I will not completely mess it up. All right, so what I do is reachability analysis. So this is how can we reach goals while avoiding things that are bad, unsafe. And usually the safety part is the pretty key part of this. So how can we analyze the safety of the system in general? What are we curious about? The first thing we need to do is to be able to define what safety means. So typically we have a region that is safe, a region that's failure, and then a region that is not currently failure. You're not currently in collision, but you will inevitably end up in collision. So what I mean is that the failure is the all system states that are unacceptable. We do not want to reach them. And the unsafe states are states from which it is not possible to avoid entering the failure set. Here's an example from one of my colleagues. So this is a drone that is currently safe. This is one that is unsafe. So it has not reached the failure set, but it is unsafe because inevitably it is going to reach that. And so we'd like to be able to define for a system what that failure is and be able to, from that, characterize the unsafe set. You can similarly think about this like if you are on a bike going very fast towards a tree, there's a point at which even if you turn as hard as you can and slam on your brakes, you are going to crash into that tree. And so is there a way in which we can characterize that set so we can tell you stay out of this in order to not run into the tree? Another example that I really like is from some colleagues from New Mexico that looked at applying anesthesia to patients. For applying anesthesia, in this case, my very cartoonish representation of it would be if you can sort of model, let's say, consciousness over time and turn this into awake, unconscious, and critical state, you would like to avoid the patient being awake or dead during the surgery. And so that would be considered the failure set. And so you'd like to be able to back out of that, the regions from which you are either applying so much anesthesia that they are going to die, or so little anesthesia that even if you cranked it up right now, they're going to become awake, at least temporarily, before they go back under. Everything that's left then is therefore the safe set that you want to be able to maintain as you're applying the anesthesia. Is this at a high level? Good. This has also been done on other types of systems like artificial pancreas type systems where you're trying to figure out how to apply insulin to keep people within safe levels for their blood sugar. So these are all fairly simple systems that have been analyzed so far. Our goals here is to be able to analyze whether the system can reach desired states while avoiding dangerous states, as you mentioned. If we have inputs to the system, so this is just analyzing in general, if it just propagates on its own, will it be able to get to the goals while avoiding unsafe things? If additionally we can have some control over it, we can input the system, can we figure out what is the right set of inputs to give it in order to drive it towards the goal and away from unsafe things. And then finally, if there are uncertainties in how we're modeling stuff, or if there are adversarial agents, so if we have things that are working against us, so that maybe keeping us from trying to achieve our goals, we'd like to be robust to these things. This comes up, I imagine, a lot on the biological system side, where we cannot model everything perfectly. Okay, so that's the like high level description of the goals. Now I'm going to go a little bit into the math. I'm going to have on the left side the math, and on the right side some figures for intuition. Before we go into that, are there any questions on just the high level motivation? So, cool. Okay, so we do something that's called a Hamilton-Jacobi reachability analysis, which is a mouthful, but the steps of it are more or less straightforward. So we assume that we have some model of our system. So we have states. In robotics, this would be like position, velocity, angles, etc. We have some inputs to our system. We call them the control, and we potentially have uncertainties or disturbances to our system that we call the disturbances. Let's say, in this case, let's say I have two position spaces, X and Y, and I have some goal in that space. This could also be an unsafe region, but for now, let's just call it a goal. I want to be able to characterize the set from which I know I'm guaranteed to be able to reach this goal within some time horizon. The way that we're going to do this is lift it up by one dimension and define a cost function for this. You can think of this cost function in this case as just distance to the goal. And so you have high cost when you're outside of the goal and low cost, negative, when you're inside of the goal. And if you just manage to reach the goal and you're on the boundary of it, then you have zero cost. That's all that this is representing. That's what this is saying. When we're inside of the goal, then our cost is non-positive. We're then going to construct something called a value function. This value function is going to encode for us the states from which we are guaranteed to be able to reach the goal. To do this, we want to be able to find the minimum cost of trajectories of the system, starting from a particular state and a particular time. So if you just look at the optimization here, we're saying we want to minimize the cost of trajectories of our system over some time horizon. Here I'm going to replace the wiggly line with our actual trajectory notation, which looks kind of scary, but this is just saying this will output the state of my system. If I start at a particular state and a particular time, I apply a control and a disturbance, and I run it for this amount of time. Now, I don't actually have to do this for every single possible trajectory of the system. It's sufficient to look at the optimal trajectory. So if I'm doing my best to reach the goal and I still can't reach the goal, well, then all the cases in which I wasn't doing my best are also not going to reach the goal. And so I can look at the optimal trajectories and ask, will those be able to reach my goal? So for that, I put this inf soup here. This is saying that my control is going to try to minimize this cost and go do gradient descent, essentially, towards the goal. And the disturbance is doing the opposite. It's trying to do gradient ascent and move me away from the goal. So this is my value function that I want to do. We have an inf soup min over this cost. The cost may or may not be convex, and this whole thing in general might be nonlinear and very non-convex to solve. And so while it would be great to solve this in general, it's very hard in practice. One very, very brute force way of doing this is to literally rid up my state space and solve for every point in space at every instant in time, whether or not that state will be able to reach the goal. This is doing something called dynamic programming. So I could grid up my state space and then update every point on that grid using what we call the Hamilton-Jacobi-Isaacs PDE. If you're familiar with machine learning type stuff, it's very similar to doing the Bellman equation, but in continuous space and time. Intuitively, this is saying that if I fix a point in space, the change in my value backwards in time, as I'm looking at propagating this backwards in time, is going to be based on this, which is called the Hamiltonian. This is saying that my control is going to try to move and minimize along the gradient of the value functions, trying to do gradient descent towards the goal. But it can't necessarily go directly in the direction of the gradient. If I'm a car and my goal is right to the right of me, I can't necessarily just move my car like this. I have to obey my dynamics and the constraints for my dynamics. And so if instead my gradient is telling me to go here, but my dynamics only allow me to move forward with a little bit left and right, I try to align my dynamics along the direction of that gradient. So I take the inner product between the dynamics of my system and this gradient, and I minimize over that, try to pick the action that brings me as close to the goal as possible. The disturbance is doing the opposite, and I update my value based on this. Now, this takes care of this min-max here, the blue and the red. There's one more minimization term, which is this minimization over time. For the sake of not getting too into the math, I'm not going to go into the intuition for this, but we have to add one more minimization term to our update equation in order to capture the minimum cost over time, whether I will ever reach my goal. Okay, so the math is just, we set up this cost function, we want to achieve this value function. In order to do that, we're going to update every point in this grid at every instant in time for some time horizon that I care about. Now, let's go ahead and do that. So here I'm propagating this for, I think I did it for 10 seconds or so. And you can see the value function evolving as I look further and further back in time. So now I'm asking for a horizon of 10 seconds. What will be my value function? And this in blue is what it is. Where the output of this, given a particular state, will tell me whether or not I will be able to achieve negative cost over time. So everywhere where the value function is negative results in the cost function being negative at the end of the time horizon. So if I take the slice of this value function at 0 and flip it over like this then is my reachable set, or in this case, it's called a reachable tube. This is the set of states from which I am guaranteed to be able to reach my goal within 10 seconds. This is nice because we can get these guarantees on being able to reach goals. We can also get guarantees on being able to avoid obstacles or doing both. Moreover, we also get the control policy. So online, we are able to look at the gradients again of this value function, and the gradient will point in the direction that I need to go in order to be able to achieve my goals. So we get both from this function, the value, which tells me whether or not I will be able to achieve my goal, and the gradient that tells me how to achieve that goal. We have a bunch of different techniques for being able to solve this on a bunch of different code bases. And in general, it's really beautiful because it's very general. It can be handled lots of different nonlinear functions. We can do safety analysis and control, etc. But there's some real challenges with it, mostly that it struggles with complex models and uncertain environments. This stems from the fact that I said that we're gridding up the entire state space. So if we care about position, let's say we have X and Y, then we have a 2D system and we have a square of grids. If I add in another state, if I now care about X, Y, and my angle or my velocity, every additional state that I care about adds exponentially more grid points that I have to analyze over. So when I want to do an analysis on like a full 12D nonlinear model of a drone, instead, this might only be tractable for like assuming that the drone is like a point mass that only moves up and down. Or if I wanted to use a car, maybe I have to, assume a cartoonish version of a car that doesn't involve friction or drift. Or if I'm trying to analyze, how a human might move, it might only be able to handle modeling a human as like a double inverted pendulum. And clearly that does not capture everything that a human can do. And so doing a safety analysis over this model is not all that useful when it comes to doing control for the full system. We also struggle with uncertain environments, and this again comes back to the computational problem. There are some ways in which we really can deal with uncertainty. So I mentioned here that we can model uncertainties as a disturbance to the system and ask if the wind is the worst that it possibly could be today, as I'm trying to navigate with my drone, will I still be able, under what conditions will I still be able to achieve my goals safely? Or if my mass is different than I expect, under what conditions will that be fine? However, I need to be able to bound that. I need to know what is the worst case that the wind could do. If I assume it's very extreme, that every day is a hurricane, then my safety analysis might be very, very conservative. If I assume that it's, too optimistic, then it could be, too optimistic. I can also handle obstacles. So I can throw in an additional cost function here. This represents an obstacle where now positive is high cost and bad being inside the obstacle, and negative is good. And I can incorporate even moving obstacles into this analysis. And this is one of my favorite videos. I think it's so beautiful how it like slices through the computation. What I get in the end here then is what's called a reach avoid set. So how I can be able to reach goals while avoiding the obstacles in the process. But to do this, because the computation takes so long, I need to know exactly how those obstacles are going to move ahead of time so that I can incorporate that into my analysis. Because it takes so long to do this, it's not that useful for many different applications. And so in general, it'd be very, very helpful to speed this up, both for the relatively simple systems that we use, but especially when you're talking about doing very interconnected nonlinear systems, like the types of system biology applications that Will's interested in. There's some stuff that we have done that have helped a bit. So we do things like decomposition, taking large scale systems and decomposing them into smaller scale subsystems, analyzing them separately and composing them together, that kind of a multi-scale approach. Warm starting, so when we find out that the world is different than we expected, like this little fan right here, rather than recomputing everything from scratch, starting with that previous initialization and updating it. And doing adaptive grids, so doing very coarse approximations initially and then updating it as we refine our grid. This does help a lot, so I won't go into detail on this, but basically doing the full 10D thing would be taking more time than the universe has existed. Doing the decomposition brings it down to however many minutes this many seconds is. And then as we incorporate more and more of these techniques, we get to the point where we can start doing some analysis, not so much in real time for these systems, but at least quickly-ish online. But it's still the main struggle that we have. Here's some just examples of what we've done on the robotics side of things, of just trying to get robots to fly through hoops, have them navigate through environments that they haven't seen before, have them navigate around pedestrians as pedestrians are moving around, etc. But again, if you want to just take the high dimensional nonlinear dynamic systems and do the guarantee safe control, currently it's impossible to do tractably for many, many systems of interest. Okay, enter Will. So Will did his undergrad at Berkeley in microbiology and math. And he's worked in many, many different labs actually, but one of the last labs that he worked in was my PhD advisor, which is not in biology, but she had some work on doing chemotherapy drug delivery, thinking about if you apply different chemotherapy drugs, how do you determine the order in which you should apply them and when you should apply them in order to try to drive the phenotypes of the tumor cells towards desirable phenotypes, so then you can target them. And these types of systems, at least when I was there, the approaches that were being used were very crude for trying to model these and analyzing them. Because again, we can't do the analysis on full interconnected high dimensional nonlinear systems. So the types of biological systems that Will is interested in when he first approached me is just way too high dimensional and coupled for tractable analysis using the approaches that we do typically. So good thing that Will also has a degree in math. So I have pointed Will towards what I find to be a very difficult body of literature from professors Yaqin Chow and Stan Osher, who are applied mathematicians at UC Riverside and UCLA. And they have this thing called the Hopf solution for reachability analysis. And I'm not going to get into all the mathematical details. I'm sure Will can do that in a presentation sometime. But the high level idea is for linear time varying systems. The computation speed can be sped up by orders of magnitude. And this is because we're not doing this dynamic programming of updating every single point based on gradients at every single instant in time, where it scales exponentially with the dimension. Instead, now you can update each grid point in space and time with independently of the others and be able to parallelize this. And so you can do very, very fast linear reachability analysis. Under some additional assumptions involving convexity and whatnot, the global solution can be obtained through a very fast optimization process. This is not largely known outside of the math community, I think, because it's really difficult to read and parse and get through, and there's no open source code bases at all. Will took like 5 whiteboards right by where he sits and spent several days pouring through this, deciphering it all, managed to get the code base from Yatin Chow, which was written by a mathematician, so you can imagine the quality of the code, and recreated it for himself. There has been some work on this. So here's, it seems like largely the Navy. So here's an example in which the Navy did a multi-agent game in which they're trying to trap this pursuer, or sorry, evader right here, using 2 agents. And the agents actually coordinate with each other how to do this envelope thing in order to capture the evader. And this is emergent behavior. This is not something that they prescribed for it to do. It's just when they did the analysis of how do you reach this goal, this came out of it naturally. But it's this is kind of the only main application that we've seen of it, because these guys are just mathematicians and they're just, are doing this for these abstract systems that don't really mean much. So the first thing that Will did is recreate this in an open source code base using Julia. Here on the left are sets, reachable sets shown for a system using this grid-based solution. And here's the ones that come out of his Julia code. So you see they're very, very similar. The computation, I have his plot, which is for first his initial Julia implementation, the original C++ code that he got from the mathematicians, and then his more recent Julia implementation. The normal reachability analysis would not fit, would not come close to fitting on this. For 2 dimensions, it would take like minutes. 4 dimensions takes hours. 6 dimensions, like maybe you could solve over a course of days. So here instead, Will is solving this on the order of 0.1 seconds. So this is much, much faster. The key is that this is for linear time varying systems, and most systems that we care about that are interesting are nonlinear. You have things that are squared together, you have sines and cosines and things like this. So this is great. If we can easily linearize some systems, this would be fantastic to do. There are many applications for this already, but the types of biological systems that Will came to me with are ones for which we would have to be able to handle some nonlinearities. Okay, so if we have linear dynamics, we can do this hop reachability analysis in order to get the safe control. So now the question is, can we find some connection between here to here? So can we take nonlinear dynamics and be able to find effective ways of linearizing them? I'm sorry, I might be going, how am I doing on time?
Right, there's a clock up there. I'm turning my phone off.
I just realized
how
that.
we're doing.
25.
How much?
Yeah, we got 5 more minutes.
5 more, okay,
Yeah.
okay. That's great. But this is the part that I don't understand very much. All right, so enter Bernard Koopman and John von Neumann. In the 1930s, they discussed this concept called Koopman lifting. The basic idea is that any nonlinear system can be represented by a linear operator in an infinite Hilbert space. In English, this means that if you take some low-dimensional nonlinear system, if you can map this to a different space, a change of basis, essentially, to something that's very, very high dimensional, but linear, in theory, if it's high dimensional enough, you can actually fully represent the lower dimensional nonlinear system. And this was nice. So like, here's, yeah, this is in math, what we're saying. So we take the system and then we map it to this non-linear system, or we do that non-linear system to a linear system where we can represent the change in dynamics using this linear function K. But we are left to find out what this map will do. So I'll skip through this. This is an example of that Will sent me of a simple version where you can easily lift this up to a linear space. But the main challenge is that this type of mapping is rarely easy to find analytically. So this was nice in the 1930s as like a thought experiment, but in practice, how are you going to be able to do that lifting? There's many different examples that have been tried, singular value decomposition, Fourier bases, polynomial bases, etc., with some success depending on the application. However, now with neural networks, this has become a booming field. So doing Koopman to things is becoming a very, very big deal. And it's become surprisingly effective. So here's a paper that came out recently in which they were able to model swinging ropes and soft robots and be able to model them in the high dimensional linear space and actually be able to control them pretty effectively to be able to reach goals. Now, this is not using anything formal for how they actually do the planning and analysis. So there's no safety or goal guarantees, but it works pretty well even using really simple controllers. So the idea now is to use this in order to do the mapping from the nonlinear dynamics to the high dimensional linear space. And then from there, to apply Will's Julia code, doing the Hopf reachability analysis in order to give us guaranteed safe control online. Here's some plots of him initially starting the machine learning process for his rolled out and lowered Koopman trajectories, as well as the training progress. This is the main thing that we've been working on, is all the fine tuning of the neural network stuff for right now. And I'm sure he'd be happy to talk in detail if anyone's interested in that. So our next steps is to do the Koopman lifting, merge this with the current Hopf code, compare to other analyses on biological systems. I mentioned the anesthesia, the artificial pancreas, etc. Do as well a proof of concept experiment on a robotic platform. In particular, the head of the Robotics Institute, Henrik, has this fleet of autonomous golf carts that he wants to like drive through crowds of students without hitting them, hopefully. And this is an example of which being able to do real-time analysis on safety and control would be very effective. And then we'd like to extend this to the biological systems that are currently intractable to analyze the type of systems that Will initially came to me wanting to do. So with that, thank you. My email is very easy to remember. It's sherbert@ucsd.edu, and Will's is right here. And we're happy to take any questions or comments either right now if we have time or over email if we don't. All right.
I can't wait for Will to piggyback on this next year when we start having more of the trainees do their presentation. So we'll look forward to that. Anybody got any questions?
I've got a really crazy one.
Oh, please.
Since Danny's sitting next to me. Could you apply this to basketball players or hockey players avoiding collisions to figure out what individual strategies are so that we could potentially predict who's like more at risk of injury?
Yeah, that's so as we were walking over, Will and I were talking about, so one of the things on the robotics side that we struggle with is doing planning and analysis of multi-agent systems. Often you can sort of do pairwise analysis of how two will, but when you have a whole team moving through each other, representing the joint space of all of them, it again becomes exponentially intractable. And so that's one of the very first things that we want to try, is not basketball players initially, but looking at multi-robot scenarios in which they need to navigate around each other. And in order to, at least on that side, you're controlling them. So in order to find the safe path, but you can do the same type of analysis on saying, if they have different strategies, what will their safety bubbles be, essentially. So yes, that type of analysis I think would be really cool to check out.
We have a couple of people on campus who are quite interested in vision tracking, and not only in relation to basketball, but also in relation to baseball, and whether the data can hit the pitch or stuff like that. And different people use different strategies, and so one is in psychiatry, Dr. Greg Applebaum, and the other is in ophthalmology and Dr. Wanger. So there could be an interesting analysis here. We could collect some good data with some of the data, either video data from games, or some of the data that Greg's getting might be an interesting application.
Well, basketball already has their trackable data that tracks their motion on.
Great, cool. Yeah, you know where to find Will. And I'm, yeah, Herbert. So yeah, that would be fantastic. I'd love it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Appreciate you.
Appreciate that. I hate to cut this short. but
Yeah, I
do-
understand. I'm sorry for taking
No,
this much.
no, we're excited. But I do want to bring on Dr. Jones, who I hope we haven't, well, she's still there. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Can you share screen? Do you need to do anything?
I am going to try to share my screen right now.
Did you get to watch, Dr. Herbert's presentation?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes. Let's see. So thing that's always tricky here is that for some reason, can you all see it or no, let's see. Hold on one second.
Dr. Herbert,
All right, so
Sure.
thank you. I'm just trying, let's see.
Thank you. Thanks, Sharon.
All right, so I'm going to try and share this PowerPoint. Are you seeing, let's see, are you seeing, you're seeing a PowerPoint, but not a PowerPoint that's playing, correct?
Great.
Okay, great. How about this? What are you seeing? Are you seeing a presenter view or a regular view?
The presenter view.
Okay,
Presenter view.
how about now?
Yeah, yes.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have any, oh,
I'm sorry, Dr. Jones. I don't know if Dr. McCullough would like to introduce you.
sure.
Since she used to be in the interfaces program and we're presenting to trainees today.
This Sam is one of our best known alumni from the Interfaces graduate program. I presume you still work for the American Chemical Society? Is that
I
right?
do.
And,
I am, yeah.
She hosts a podcast, is it Solutions or Orbitals? I forget which one. Does scientific writing and communications. And the podcasts are super cool. We'll really enjoy listening to them. Sam was in biomedical sciences.
Yep.
With Dr. Wilkinson.
Yes, I was with Miles Wilkinson. Yeah, in the biomedical sciences program, UCSD. Yeah.
And she was one of the most active members of the program when it came to our events, and served as the sort of key organizer for some of our symposium and stuff. So it's been great to stay in touch with Sam. And thank you so much for doing this, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, thank you so much for having me. And I will say that I really loved being part of the Interfaces program because I think, and I think it's actually connected to why I decided to move into science communication, science journalism. I have always just found so many disciplines within the sciences so interesting. And I think Interfaces was a great opportunity for me to meet people doing so many different things and just kind of pick their brains. And that's sort of my job now. So it was a good introduction to learning a lot about a lot of different fields. So as you can probably tell, this is not a research talk. I'm no longer in academia, but I think I was part of the Interfaces program in, I want to say 2015, 2016. It might have spanned into part of 2017. But I was at UCSD over at the Sanford Consortium doing my work in Miles Wilkinson's lab. I graduated, defended my dissertation in May 2018. So now it's been about 4.5 years, which in some ways it feels like far less and in other ways far more. All right. And if something weird happens with my presentation, it's kind of hard for me to see. So just yell at me and I will fix it. Okay. So like I just mentioned, hi, I'm Sam. I do have a PhD in biomedical science from UCSD, But I also now am a science journalist, as well as audio producer, editor, and host. I'm also a freelance fact checker, and I've worked in science video as a writer and host. So what I'm going to talk with you about today is sort of how I figured out what I want to do. And I will say that this is sort of an ever evolving search for what I want to do. Even when I really enjoy what I'm doing, which I would say I definitely do right now, there's being in science communication, science journalism, there are just so many different opportunities and ways to kind of, I don't know, explore the sciences and explore how you want to bring those to, bring them to a general public. So always figuring things out, but this is how I figured things out when I was in graduate school. So I started to, I would say, probably 3 years into my PhD. So my PhD took me about 5 years. And I would say 3 years in, I was pretty sure that I didn't want to stay in academia, not because I was having a horrible experience. Really, it was just the passion was not quite there for me. So although there were things that I enjoyed, and I had a lot of respect for people who found that field or that project that really called to them and they wanted to make that their career, it just wasn't going to be for me. And so I started sort of sifting through my options, trying to attend really whatever career talks or panels were available to me. So I was going to info sessions and panels for truly like anything that I might be remotely interested in, just to see what might pique my interest. And so one of those was medical writing. And I left thinking medical writing isn't necessarily for me, because there was a lot of like writing up clinical trials, different drug trials. I was realizing, okay, I think I want to reach a more general audience. I love talking about science. I love hearing about other people's research, about talking about my research. I think I want to be able to speak to a more general audience. So medical writing, not so much for me, but this idea of writing in general piqued my interest. So then what I did was I was very lucky. I was at UCSD, and UCSD Extension has a science writing class. And now actually they have a science communication, I believe it's a science communication certificate that's, I want to say 4 or 5 classes. When I started, there was just one class. And it was like 7 to 10 p.m. on Mondays. And I knew that this was something that could be for me when I would get excited to show up at a class on a Monday from 7 to 10 p.m. And so it was there that I really learned that science writing is not this one size fits all in terms of audience or medium. You have things like podcasting, you have video, you have scientific audiences you might want to be reaching, but you also have general audiences, you have kids, you have really, I could go on and on and on. So it became clear to me that this was something I might be very interested in. So then what I did was, through the course, I actually met someone who is a public information officer at UCSD. Public information officers are, I think of as sort of the liaison between the researchers and the research and the journalists and media outlets. So they kind of are at this very important midway between those. And so they write press releases. They really get that research out to journalists who then can pick it up and make it accessible to the general public, typically through, a newspaper, online format, sometimes video, audio. So with her, I was able to learn how to write press releases. And I learned that they were the opposite of academic writing, where as opposed to having this structure where you have a big introduction and a lot of information kind of leading up to your conclusions, it's completely flipped. You've got to hit the general audience with the take-home message, the importance of like, why are they even bothering to continue reading? And then you get into more of the nuance and kind of wrap things up. So it was just a really interesting experience for me to kind of think about science and communicating science in a different way than I did when I was really trying to communicate to other scientists. And so then from there, once I realized that science writing was something I was really interested in, I needed to build up clips, which is the term for just writing samples, proving to people that you can write, and so they should therefore hire you. So I started to kind of seek out local institutions. One of those was the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. and I should mention, like, I was still doing my PhD during this time. So this was sort of wherever I had time. So it's typically just evenings, weekends, when I had time available, when I wasn't actively running an experiment, that I could do some writing and be reaching out to people. And so they took a chance on me and let me write some press releases for them do some interviews with scientists. And that was great. It was really fun. I learned a lot. I think a big thing, just like with academia, there's a lot of failure. I think with this kind of writing, it's just, with journalism, you fail more often, but shorter term. And so you just have more quick experiences of failure, I think. But then you also have more quick experiences of success. It's just kind of, I think it all evens out regardless of where you are. But it was a really good experience having someone really just take my writing and completely tear it to shreds, because that's how I became better. And I still get my writing torn to shreds by editors all over the place, but it's in a constructive way. And every time I sit down to write, I feel like I am better than the last time. And I think that's kind of, there's some alignment with academia there, right? You're constantly learning, you're troubleshooting, you're becoming the better version, better experimenter. And so anyways, this, I'm really grateful to Scripps Institution of Oceanography for giving me that opportunity. And yeah, like I said, I just continued to get feedback as much as I could. So I write for science blogs like Neurite San Diego. So Neurite is wonderful. It's completely student-led, graduate student-led. And so you are all pitching story ideas about either current neuroscience or questions in neuroscience. And it's all of these blog posts are written for a general audience. And then you're editing each other's work and giving each other feedback. And so it's a really cool opportunity to not just work on your writing, but I also found a lot of really close friends through that experience. And many of them continued on in academia. They just really love communicating science as well. And so that's why they did Neurite. I kind of knew at that point that I wanted to make writing a full-time job. And so we went into it with, I guess, sort of different goals in the end, but I think everybody really benefited from it. And then, yeah, I started then writing for some bigger outlets. I started writing for a video series called SciShow. That's one of the Vlog brothers. That's for Complexly, if you know Hank or John Green, and then also for Psychology Today. And then I started attending workshops and events. I don't know why that got in there. I must have written that on something else, but ComSciCon, National Association of Science Writers. These are some events. I was going to say ComSciCon San Diego is another one that's really great. So it's a local conference. It's called a Communicating Science Conference. And so it's a couple of days full of panels, talks, really opportunities for you to get to know people who are in the science communication world, whether they be journalists, audio producers, video hosts. Some are former academics, they have PhDs, some are not. So it's just kind of a really nice mix of people. And there's typically a ComSciCon in San Diego. I think the last one was in 2020 and it was virtual. And then last year, I don't believe they had one. I'm not sure about this year either, but hopefully that's coming back. So things to look out for. But those were great opportunities just to meet people and really ask myself, is this what I want to do? Could I see myself sort of fitting in this world? And every time the sort of resounding feeling I got was yes. I also did a lot of informational interviews, with a lot of very nice people, which is one of the reasons that most of the time when people reach out to me asking if they can chat with me for 30 minutes and pick my brain, I say yes. Because if those people hadn't said yes, I wouldn't have had as many opportunities to learn. And so, yeah, I always tell people, if there's something you think you might want to do, find someone who does that thing and see if you can buy them a coffee and chat for 30 minutes. Of course, be flexible, work with their schedule, but I found that was such a great way of figuring out, okay, what were the steps that you took to get there? Do you think that I need to do X, Y, and Z too? Like, what are the pros and cons of your job every day? Like, what do you love? What do you wish you were doing that was different? So definitely ask a lot of questions. And so, yeah, in the last few months of my PhD, I had a bunch of clips that I had sort of piled up over a couple of years. And I knew that I wanted to have a future in science communication. And so I started to apply for full-time jobs and internships. And if anyone has questions as I'm going through this, feel free to ask, but I'm hoping to leave like at least a few minutes at the end. Okay, so the first job that I got post PhD was as an assistant editor at Chemical and Engineering News, which is in Washington, D.C., which is where I currently am. So it was primarily editing, making sure that the production schedule ran on time, some writing. Chemical and Engineering News is typically geared toward academics and people with at least an undergraduate level training in chemistry. So it wasn't exactly the audience that I ultimately wanted to be reaching, but it in some ways felt like less of a dramatic leap from academia. And in that, I learned the in and outs of a weekly production schedule. It's a magazine that comes out every week, which is actually really fast. It's pretty wild how fast stories get written and checked. And it was a great experience to have. And I also learned how to write a tight deadline, ask for help when things were not progressing well, just like in research. It is always better to raise your hand, ask a question before things get too far down the road where it's even harder to sort of backtrack and fix things. So just becoming comfortable with admitting when something is not going the way you expected or you can't figure something out, because I think that people always appreciate that type of transparency. Ultimately, I did learn that it was too niche of an audience for me. And I was starting to learn that pretty quickly. And fortunately, another opportunity came up also within the American Chemical Society, where Chemical and Engineering News is housed. So this was in writing and hosting a chemistry video series rather, called Reactions, which was a joint effort between PBS and the American Chemical Society. Still chemistry focused, but definitely for a more general audience. I learned a lot of new skills beyond just video script writing and hosting. I learned, because the pandemic hit, I learned how to light a room. I learned how to operate a camera. I learned how to create a set. Not things I necessarily wanted to learn, I think valuable, but I also learned that that's not what I want to do on the production end. And I'm much more interested in hosting, interviewing, writing. I also learned that YouTube is a bit of a cesspool, which I knew as someone who watches YouTube, but there were certain things about it I did not love, but I did do it for 2.5 years, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I probably would have done it a bit longer, but another really cool opportunity came up. Oh, and I should say, also, Dr. McCulloch mentioned that I host a podcast. I did, at the time that I was working on Reactions, I also was a writer and host of a podcast called Orbitals that was more chemistry focused. But now I'm actually exec producing a new podcast. I say new, it came out in, I guess it soft launched. The trailer came out at the end of 2021, but in January of this year, we had our first full episode come out. And it's been really cool. I've been writing, editing, also editing audio, which is a whole new thing, and co-hosting this podcast called Tiny Matters. So it's about tiny things in the world that have a big impact, whether they be good or bad. This is the most general audience driven project that I've ever worked on outside of maybe some of my freelance writing. So people are not expected to have beyond a high school level science education. Does not mean that I'm not introducing jargon, that I'm not introducing complex topics, but I'm taking that time to really break down the information and make it accessible. Because I am in every episode interviewing at least one scientist, and a lot of them don't necessarily have science communication training or training speaking with people who are not fellow scientists, which is fine. But then I know I've figured out sort of how to ask the questions that I need to be able to really get the information that I need for my audience. So I'm continuing to learn how to improve as an interviewer, a sound editor, a writer, a host, also how to manage a production schedule and people involved in the production schedule, which was new for me. And And then also figuring out how to grow an audience. These are things that if I look back 5 years ago and I said, oh, this is what you're going to be doing, I would have said, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if I could do that. But I think it's just kind of one of those things that you just steadily work at, and you find the people who are supportive, who make you feel like you can be transparent with them about what is and is not working, and are really there to offer their guidance and constructive feedback. And so I also then have, I continue to work as a freelance science writer. So I've written for the New York Times, Scientific American, Nature, New Science, Scientist rather, Popular Science, a couple other ones. And I really have been able to write such a range of stories, as you can kind of see here. Like there's one I wrote for Nature on the pandemic. This other one is like an AI story. And then there's this weird Evo Devo sponge sneeze story that I wrote for the New York Times. So it's, oh, sorry. Did someone say something? Oh, I think I'm just getting like a little feedback. Yeah, it's just been, very fun kind of seeing what opportunities are out there. I've also been done some freelance writing for bigger groups. So like more copywriting, which is different. It's not journalistic writing. So at one point I was able to actually interview Dr. McCulloch for a group called Simula that's in Norway. And also written for a bunch of different biotech companies, startups, some of which are in San Diego. So yeah, there are just so many opportunities that exist. And I'm sure there are a dozen more that I don't even know exist that I might stumble upon, which I think for me is kind of my ideal. I think I'm big on variety. And so that's why I think I enjoyed in graduate school being part of a big umbrella program like biomedical sciences, why I loved being part of interfaces and learning about all of these other fields of research. And then ultimately why I moved into science communication full-time. So I do have some links. I'm happy to send them after this to just the UCSD science writing course that I mentioned, to ComSciCon, to the local science writing chapter in San Diego. It's called San Diego Science Writers. Like I mentioned, also NASW, which is the National Association of Science Writers. The student membership, I believe, is quite reasonable. It's maybe $30 a year. And if you're interested in learning more about what a career in science writing, science journalism might look like, the Open Notebook is a great place. There are tons of resources. And there are also a lot of different science writing internships. So I have a link to a document that was so helpful for me back in 2017 when I was just kind of exploring where I might want to be applying for things in early 2018 as I was nearing the end of my PhD. And then you can find me on more social media than I would like to be on. But that is a way that is important for journalists to share their work and communicate with each other. And I also feel free to reach out to me over email with any questions. You can see my email is there. And then to kind of look at some of the stuff that I've done to see if any of it interests you, you can go to sjoneswriting.com. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sam. That's really interesting, and it's very hard to overstate how important science writing and science communications is. If it wasn't for really good science writers who make science interesting and accessible to the public, then we wouldn't get the support of the public and government to do it. And so it's really, really important. And also, I'm kind of like a science podcast junkie, and I get so many ideas and learn about so many things, not from reading papers, but from listening to podcasts. So, I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Does anyone have any questions for Sam?
Sam, I had a question. Out of curiosity, like when you're freelance writing, are are you just thinking of these ideas? Are you perusing papers still in academic fields, or do you get suggestions from people?
It's kind of a combination of all three. A lot of it, I would say probably 60% of it is me perusing academic papers, but more specifically ones that are embargoed, meaning that they haven't actually been released yet. So I have early access to a lot of press releases. And so if I see a press release that looks really, really interesting, then I might follow up, reach out to an editor and say, hey, this story is coming down the line. I think it would be a great fit for you. Let me know what you think. And then usually those are the ones that are, they're news stories. So there's a very quick turnaround. So I might see the press release, and then 72 hours later, my editor at the New York Times or Scientific American will say, or after I pitch it, they'll say, all right, in 48 hours, I need the story. I'm like, okay. So those are really quick. For ones that are a little bit more long form, sometimes there's an editor who will say, oh, we have this series of stories that's coming out. Do you want to pitch within this realm? And it'll be a kind of more less newsy, like more of a deep dive on a topic. And so that's also an option. And then another one is sometimes I just have like weird ideas, or like I see a thing that happened and I think, I wonder why that happens, or I wonder if anyone else thinks that that's weird, or I'll read a story that someone wrote and I'll feel like, okay, that was good, but they left out this whole other section, or like there's so much more to say about this, and this is why, and that's how I'll kind of reach out to an editor. Does that help?
Yeah, super cool.
I had a question. So you were saying that you have both the freelance work as well as a somewhat steady job with the American Chemical Society and all those cases. Do you feel like having that association with a larger society or corporation or something is important as an aspiring science writer?
No, I think it was important for me getting my foot in the door. But now when I pitch things, I pitch because I wouldn't want there to be a conflict of interest. I never pitch any story that has to do with any sort of paper that comes out of the American Chemical Society, because they have, I think, 60 different academic journals. So I'm not pitching anything from that. And I also have a completely separate like email address and everything that I use for pitching freelance work. And I don't even mention that I work for the American Chemical Society because I want to remain independent. But I will say that working for a big organization like the American Chemical Society was very helpful in bringing me to DC, like having me move to DC, and then immediately having contacts there that I could ask questions of, that I could ask about their careers and sort of how they got to where they are, and then start to build a network. So I would say that's the part that has been really helpful. But otherwise, now that I've created those connections and then built off of them, I remain totally independent when I freelance.
Anybody else? Okay, I have one more. So with the science writing, so I've had a few experiences of research going to places, usually places like Wired, and have usually been frustrated by the results. So for example, one was a project in which we had safe navigation of humans navigating around robots, and the headline of the Wired article was "Welcome to the lab where humans battle robots."
Yeah.
Felt like the opposite of what we were trying to say. So how do you balance the trying to keep up the excitement with actually getting across the the details or the truth?
Yeah, I think that that's something that has actually become more a part of the conversation when I go to something like the National Association of Science Writers meeting, where there's actually a panel about let's not overblow research or blow it up in a way that's not accurate or is just an opportunity to try and grab clicks. I will say that I think because I have an academic background, a lot of scientists that don't want to talk to journalists will talk to me, and they'll specifically say to me, I will talk to you because I trust you. And also, could I maybe see my quotes? If I'm writing a story that is a little more, like, I'm not going to send someone an entire story that they can look at the whole thing ahead of time, but I will always send people their quotes because I want them to be able to trust that I'm not going to quote them inaccurately. And I'm very, like, I take it very seriously to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting anyone. I will say what does stink as a writer is that 95% of the time or more, we don't write the headlines for the stories. We are not the ones who write it. It's like some editor or copy editor way higher up. I have had a couple stories that I've written where I didn't feel like it was like, that's pretty wild. That's like a little crazy that yours was like messed up so badly. But there have been a couple of times where I've seen a headline and been like, all right, like I wouldn't have written that. But I will say that the editors who I now work with more consistently, who I have a relationship with, I will see sort of what they're thinking headline wise, or I'll suggest a couple headlines and then they'll usually tweak them, but they're very open to me saying like, I think if we write this, people might misinterpret it as this other thing. And usually they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. What about this? And we sort of go back and forth a bit, but I totally agree. You should also know that most writers, it's like their worst nightmare when that kind of thing also happens to their story, because they've spent so much time writing it. And then some copy editor throws sparkly heading on there that's just wrong. And it's so irritating. So I'm sorry that happened, but it is more of a conversation about headlines, but also the story itself, sort of like, are we maintaining accuracy? How much is this just like, are we overblowing this? Are we overselling this? Usually a lot of editors will say like, if someone writes breakthrough, we're like, let's take a step back. Like, what does it mean for something to be a breakthrough? What does it mean for something to be like the most important? So I think that more and more of these conversations are being had within the industry, but you might still sometimes get that. And I think it's also fair for you to tell the writer, if you speak with a writer again in the future, I think it's fair for you to explain your experience and just say like, I just want to let you know this happened to me last time. So I'm a little hesitant to speak with a journalist or to talk about my work, and just kind of see what they say. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
And if anybody has any questions, I've got contact information, we can follow up, and yes.
Are you gonna post the PowerPoint, or, because she has a bunch of links on that? Or is Sam able to share it?
I'll post the recording on our YouTube channel that you can access through the website.
I can, if it would be helpful, then do you mean the links to, like, if you're interested in science communication, that page of links?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can just, Kelly, I can send that, I can just copy paste that into an email for you if you would like. And then you can, or I guess I don't know, if I reply all to the email that was to me and Interfaces students, will people see it?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just do that after this, if that's helpful.
I appreciate that very much. And again, thank you so much. It's fun to talk to somebody who's been in this program and did not necessarily take as you said, a traditional academic route. And you're still using all of your knowledge. That's great. And we might call on you again, both of you. Thank you so much. I would like the trainees to stay so I can take a picture of everybody, if that's all right. And thank you for joining us today. Glad you're here. And if anybody needs anything, let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you both. Stop the recording.